All right, we're ready to start our second panel of the day, which is working with AI. I'm pleased to introduce our esteemed panelists. My good friend Adam Curry, an inventor and tech entrepreneur with a background in consciousness research. You should really ask him about some of the things he's been doing. Adam is the creator of BLUON, the leading AI and data platform for the trades, and is a founder or advisor to several other growth stage companies. He's been featured on the Telepathy tapes, which will be broadcast soon, I believe, the Discovery Channel, and numerous documentaries. Senator Jeff Golden serves as Oregon's District 3 Senator since 2018. Senator Golden, already.
Yeah, it's good. I should quit here.
Yeah, right. Has spent over 3 decades shaping policy, media, and community development in Oregon. His political career spans roles as Jackson County Commissioner and Environmental Policy Aide, complemented by his time hosting the daily NPR radio show, The Jefferson Exchange, and immense possibilities on PBS television. With a commitment to sustainability and public service, Senator Golden's work reflects a lifelong dedication to enacting meaningful change in Oregon communities. Heather Stafford's bio has been lost.
We heard it.
Oh, here we go. We're going to do it again because Heather is a repeat offender here. Heather, as we know, by way of reminder, serves as CEO Executive Director of the Rogue Workforce Partnership, Southern Oregon's Workforce Investment Board. She leads initiatives to bridge the skills gap, foster economic growth, and improve local employability. A strong advocate for tech-enabled solutions and policies supporting underserved populations, Heather plays a key role in shaping workforce development at state and national levels. And Marta Tarantsey. Marta is the Regional Development Officer with Business Oregon, serving Jackson and Josephine counties. Passionate about connecting people to resources, she is involved in local nonprofit boards focused on downtown revitalization and rural economic growth. Marta's public service career began with a civil rights fellowship through PSU after earning her MBA from Willamette University, where she studied management across public, government, and nonprofit sectors. So I'd like to kick things off with a question to any of you fine panelists. AI may not replace people, but people with AI will replace people without AI. That's a disruption that's going to happen. As AI shifts the workplace from replacing tasks to enhancing human performance, or as Kim yesterday said, amplified intelligence, how can organizations manage the short-term disruptions while building a long-term strategy for empowered AI-augmented workforces? Again, a real easy question to start off with. Marta, why don't you kick us off here?
Oh, goodness. Okay. Hi. Good morning. I brought a little show and tell example. I work for a state agency, and as we know, the government is not always the first one to jump on new technologies. But I'm very proud to be with an agency that is committed to investing in Oregonians' prosperity. I have an example. A part of what we do is we help companies that are out of the state or out of the country, and Oregon companies look at various sites in Oregon to see where they can locate. So in 2022, we partnered with a publisher to have a magazine that featured all of the communities that wanted to be featured for a subsidized fee in the Oregon Site Selection Featured magazine. In 2022, this was the gold standard. This was the best practice of what you wanted to put in front of a site selector at a gathering of consultants. Often they're known as site eliminators. They want to look at what's out there and just make it an easy no on a majority of sites before you get them in your state to wine, dine them, and court them with cool industrial sites. Well, fast forward to September 2024, I went to the International Economic Development Council conference in Denver, and this is almost becoming a thing of the past. It is a swag you're trying to get rid of, really, sometimes. They are showcasing tools where you have a chatbot that thinks like a site selector or a site eliminator. It is asking you all of these crucial questions. So while I know the site selector consultancy industry is not going to go out of business, a lot of processes that touch how we advertise services or a state as a destination, that's changing. So we have the opportunity in the public and private sector to lead this and prepare for this, because the writing has been on the wall for some time. As Heather said, the jobs are changing. In fact, the state of Oregon has the State AI Advisory Council right now working on some recommendations and an action plan to present to Governor Kotek on how we can implement this technology to make sure the quality of services Oregonians are getting is top-notch, but also to make sure we're being as efficient as possible as the state. So being ready for it and actually listening to all of the people who are saying that it's here, that's how we prepare for it.
We going down the line?
Sure.
So I have a bit of a list because I'm quite close to workforce, but the first thing I think that I have is just learn, learn, learn. Be vulnerable, ask questions, learn. I said enough of that, but pay attention, invest in tools, try things out. If you run an organization, I would also say take a happiness census of your people. What, in their job description, how much of what they do is automatable and how much brings them actual fulfillment and joy and where they feel like they're productive and creative. So if you can automate that and take a census and build some tools that are easily automated, do it. And it will be messy. And I would say to channel my sort of inner entrepreneur and channel investors, fail fast and fail forward. Failure doesn't really exist. It's really iteration. I don't even think we should use the term failure anymore. But yeah, know your organization, know your team, know what you're trying to do, and know which parts of it are low-hanging fruit for automation. And it's make a mess, play in the sandbox. There's open source stuff, it's Wild West, like find some tools, get to know how they work, and get comfortable using them.
Well, first of all, Paul, I would like to thank folks for inviting me to participate today, especially Jordan, who called me some time ago. I did think at the time, are you sure? Because my guess is there are few, if any, people in this room who know less about artificial intelligence than I do. And I was a little bit nervous. I see somebody shaking their head there. I'll compete with you about who knows the least. And Paul, you really helped me out last night in your opening comments when you said this conference is much more about producing questions and answers, because I have a whole lot of the first and almost none of the second. But I'm going to pivot from your question to something else, which is a skill we politicians develop. Because I have thought about it, how I might be able to add some value this morning. And that's getting into some of what's government's role going to be here? And that's one of the primary questions. And for sure, government's going to have a role. There are a few people who say, stay out of it, no regulation. We, the free market, and all of us smart folks will figure this out. There's not a lot of history that supports that. And even people who don't like government, and there are a lot of them, kind of fall back on us when there are these irresolvable, really difficult conflicts to draw lines and try to deliberate, what should and shouldn't be allowed. So we know that we're going to be in, and we're in the very early stages. And some say, well, we're starting out where there's no consensus at all on all this. And I would say there is consensus. I think the consensus is something like, I'm in for regulation that forbids or constrains false and damaging speech and messaging, as long as I'm the one who gets to decide what's false and damaging speech, right? So, and our record so far isn't encouraging in government when you look at the social media battle of the last few years, especially turbocharged during the pandemic. There's not a lot of reason to think that government's going to solve this. I'd love to be able to say to you, we got this, just go back to your work and research and we'll take care of it. But we're going to try. And what I'd like to do, Paul, is mention a couple of pieces of legislation that have already happened or in the works, and then maybe in the second round talk about the big bill this session that I think really gets to the questions. And it also has an opportunity for people who want to participate in a coming commission, state commission, on all of this. The first bill that I'm aware of was last year when that required disclosure of the use of AI in any messages involved with politics, campaigns, candidate races, issue races. Basically, the deepfake advances in video and audio is worrisome to almost everybody paying attention. It freaks politicians out to see themselves on the screen absolutely credibly saying things that are completely the opposite of what they believe. We don't know what to do with that. So a bill last year required disclosure. AI has been used in the production of this message. And that hasn't fully hit the ground yet. It probably will in next year's election. There's another bill I just heard about this week over in the House. I'm in the Senate, and we're at a point in the session where we don't know quite what the other chamber is doing. Apparently, I was visited by a delegation of realtors this week, and they're concerned about a bill in progress, not sure it'll pass at all, that forbids the use of AI algorithms for producing a fair market price for rentals. So I suppose landlords and property management firms use this and say, describe a rental that's available. What's the fair market price for this? And the concern is that that will lead to collusion. It'll spit out, that's $1,800, that's the fair price. And that all landlords will use that and there won't be competition. I will say I don't quite understand that would be the case, and it's one of the ways in which I think there might be some ungrounded fear, but I need to learn more. I think I'd like to leave it there, and if I have an opportunity to come back, Paul, I'd really like to talk about House Bill 3592, which is the biggest cut that state government has made so far that has the opportunity for the involvement of people who are interested.
It's very nice to hear a politician pivot towards legislation and not away. Adam, would you like to enlighten us with your view on AI in the workplace since you're involved in startups?
Sure. Regarding the role of AI in disruption to organizations, I'm reminded of the Chinese parable of the dragon. And it goes like this. Ignore the dragon, and it will eat you. Fight the dragon, and it will defeat you. But learn to ride the dragon, and you can wield its power and might. And the same is true for organizations and AI. If you ignore it, it will eat you. If you try to resist it, it's really quite futile. But if you learn to embrace these tools, you can transform your organizations. This is particularly true for companies. If you tool up with an AI solution and it makes your employees 2 times more productive, there is and will be a tendency to reduce your workforce so that you can achieve the same productivity and improve your short-term P&L statement and balance sheet. However, a company or organization who invests in those existing human resources will over time have 2x the productivity of the organization or the company that cut their staff. And so the temptation will be to think in terms of short-term gains, quarterly statements and that kind of thing. But I feel like the real winners are those that have a longer time horizon and can see that productivity amplifying tools in the hands of their employees or assistants is going to be the thing that wins the day for them. So I suppose I offer a prescription in 2 parts. 1, ride the dragon, and to expand your time horizon.
Jeff, I believe you referred to House Bill 932 earlier today. Would you like to come back to that?
That's good facilitating. Thank you, Paul. Actually, it's House Bill 3592. It's in the House now. It's in the Joint Committee on, I think, Information Technology. And it creates, this will take 3 or 4 minutes. I want to, it kind of bundles the questions that I think are surrounding this conference. It creates the Oregon Commission on Artificial Intelligence. And here's the charge of this commission. Here's the things that we want it to do. Conduct a literature review of public policy issues around the use of artificial intelligence technologies. And I got to say, I really like that, because so many times we have a dilemma here in state government. We create a new commission as if nobody else has the same dilemma. But this obviously is a national debate and conversation that's going on. And I'd like to steal the best stuff out there already. So let's start by an inventory of what's going on, which we often don't do in state government. Conduct a review of existing protections under federal, state, and local laws of individuals' data and privacy rights, civil rights, intellectual property rights, and safety, and how federal, state, and local laws that apply to artificial intelligence technologies align, differ, or interact. Identify uses of AI systems that present or create a high risk to individuals. Identify opportunities to support or promote innovation in AI technologies through the use of grants and incentives. Provide recommendations on appropriate uses and limitations, of course. Identify current and future economic opportunities that are available in this state and policies to maximize those opportunities. Identify impacts from the use of artificial intelligence systems on privacy interests of individuals in the state and what policies are needed to protect individual privacy. Identify impacts from the use of artificial intelligence systems on jobs and incomes in the state, policies needed to protect jobs and income from adverse effects. Review the state of education in this state around the uses of AI at the primary, secondary, and post-secondary levels. Identify at what level of education different subjects that incorporate information about AI, including ethics, are taught. Provide recommendations relating to industry-wide standards. Conduct a review around issues of unlawful discrimination. Provide recommendations on prioritizing transparency to improve the understanding of the behavior and functional components of AI. So if you know the answer to all those questions, we want you on this commission. And there's an opportunity here. This will be a 14-member commission, and appointed by the governor. None of that will happen until and unless the law passes, but I'm going to tell you how to pursue that if you have an interest. 14 members, 3 members who represent business leagues, including trade or professional associations, 3 members who represent workers, including from organized labor and trade or professional associations, 1 member who represents consumer advocacy groups, 1 member who represents public universities or community colleges, 1 member who represents the education system from early learning through high school, 1 member who represents communities that are disproportionately vulnerable to being harmed by algorithmic bias, 1 member who has expertise in technological ethics, 1 member who has expertise in privacy and data protection, 1 member who represents public safety, 1 member who represents tribal governments, and 3 non-voting members, the Attorney General, Commissioner of Bureau and Labor, and the Chief Artificial Intelligence Officer or their designee. Now, if that interests you, again, nothing's going to happen for a while, but you can go to Oregon.gov and be easily led. Does anybody here use computers? Good. Okay, if you do, Oregon.gov, and you can easily get to the governor's board and commissions page and just send a message. The bill is 3592, saying if it passes, you'd like to be informed and know more and possibly participate. Thanks.
Mm-hmm.
Something occurred to me actually from the last panel and even from last night that I want to share about workforce investment. I think we talked about systems and policies and, kind of macro level stuff. But for an individual, it was really something that Ian said in the last panel, which is you can race to your A- and get there. And the A- doesn't mean much, and the degree doesn't mean much anymore, especially going forward, if you don't have the requisite skills that you were supposed to be learning along the way, right? This is about value, and I think the more value you can create within your own self and really anchor this stuff in and do that hard work, that neuroplasticity work to learn you're gonna take it anywhere. You'll take it in any of those 13 different career opportunities that you end up in, and you'll be better off for it. So it reminded me of the sort of tortoise and the hare, and I have a 5-year-old, so tortoise and the hare. The hare just breezed by and was like, "Oh, great! I got to my checkpoint, and I'm good. I'm gonna win." And obviously the tortoise won that race. And take the time, learn it, let it sink in, and you'll be more valuable wherever you are, in whatever organization, whatever changes come your way.
On the second question?
Sure. Or go free form.
Free form. Okay, so I went to a liberal arts college in the 2010s, so of course I brought a quote. One of my favorite quotes that I used to be nervous around mentioning around my economic development colleagues was, in the future factory, or in the factory of the future, there will be machines, a man, and a dog. The man will be there to feed the dog will be there to keep the man from touching anything. And this is from the 70s or 80s. I traced the origins of this quote back to the discussions of technological improvements in postal sorting warehouses, I think in Great Britain or in the US. And so yesterday, when our MC talked about, hey, does AI scare you? I really feel like that's the equivalent of asking high school students in the 1980s whether the new TI, Texas Instruments calculator, is going to scare them. The calculator is not the scary thing. The bully that's going to take it from you and write some mean words in there about something that happened last year, that's the fear. So the technology is here to empower us. Perhaps that's a really rudimentary comparison to the graphing calculator, but I really hope that in 50 years, whatever technological advances we reach, and I hope to be around then, they will make the AI revolution today look like what graphing calculators being introduced in the 80s look like to us today. Free form.
Thank you. Yesterday, Cynthia talked with great passion about corruptors and exploiters. So I'd like to pick up that thread today. With the promise of AI-enhanced capabilities, what strategies and policies can ensure that the benefits of this technology are democratically accessible to all people rather than concentrated in the hands of a few dominant corporations who rhyme with Lugal and Microsoft?
As the founder of Lugal, I take offense. This is a tough one because we want to do something practical and we can seem like we're very disempowered to provide some sort of resistance to the centralizing forces of our world. But look at what Microsoft does in universities. They figured something out. They spend a significant amount of their money and time donating equipment, software, computers to schools and universities. It's not just because they're benevolent. It's because when a human begins to learn a tool and becomes familiar with the tool, they tend to keep using that tool throughout their careers. There's a macro level change with respect to how we are sourcing information on the internet. It used to be that to get information on the internet, you would ask a search engine, and the search engine would give you results, and it was up to you to filter through the results and to build some sort of cohesive tapestry of an answer through the websites that you browse. Increasingly, people are asking ChatGPT or one of 4 or 5 AI tools for information and relegating a lot of their sourcing and thinking to the AI. And I think that's good and bad for obvious reasons. The side of the double-edged sword that's facing your nose is that it makes control of information and thinking much easier on behalf of corporations and big government. And that is the risk. So you could perhaps reframe the conversation, or reframe the question and say, what can we do about the already existent concentration of consciousness shaping tools out there? And the reason I bring up Microsoft and the strategy of bringing their tools into classrooms early is because we do have open source AI alternatives. They're not quite as popular, but they're not unpopular either. And perhaps one strategy that can be employed as educators is to introduce open source AI tools to your students, and to resist the urge to only teach from ChatGPT or only teach from Claude or et cetera. And to include in your program a wide enough exposure to how to run these things yourselves and how to build open source AI tools. I think that's probably the best sort of decentralized immune system to the centralizing impulse that it's always going to be with us surrounding these technologies.
I want to build a little bit on that for a moment. It seems like one of the really challenging things we're going to have to do to try to get to the kind of end state that you're sort of suggesting, Paul, is revisit our systems and thinking about intellectual property. You know, we developed intellectual property rights protection because, as the public policy said, that's how we'll innovate. If you can develop good systems, if you're smart and do your R&D and develop good systems, you're going to succeed. And obviously, in this field, some people have succeeded beyond anyone's imagination. So it is a driver. Intellectual property rights is a driver of innovation. But it is also a barrier to full participation. So I think we're going to have a conversation about driving more of this evolving knowledge into open source somehow, which a lot of folks, I think the Lugals and Microsofts of the world aren't going to be very supportive of that. But it's hard to see the kind of polarization and different outcomes, vastly different outcomes for people doing much about that under the current constraints of intellectual property law.
Mm-hmm.
So I date myself with this statement, but I am a early dot-com San Francisco kid and saw the dot-com boom and bust and worked in the tech industry. So there's a lot of things that look and feel very familiar, right? Back then, you had parks full of tech people with their Nokia phones and, you know, the startups and venture capital. And I worked with entrepreneurs and investors for a lot of years. And I believe that disruptions like this to this magnitude favor the nimble. And I think large corporations have been aware for a long time that they are fire blankets on innovation. When you get to a certain size as a company, you're less about inventing and less about, you know, prototyping and piloting, and you become much more about supply chains and logistics and operations, right? That becomes your superpower. But that's not nimble. So in some ways, these are almost like their own government institutions. And what I think is exciting is the open source component, and I'll make a weird parallel that might make sense to the slow food movement, slow money movement, slow productivity movement, in that small entrepreneurs are going to have if they grit and they keep and they pursue, are going to have an outsized ability to win right now. And I think that's really exciting. And I really, really like that. And I would also say then behave accordingly, buy local, support those innovators that are doing this type of work, and don't look to the big corporations to solve things. And this won't last forever. So there's a window of time to be able to take advantage and innovate here. And one more thing I'll say just about, because in the workforce system, we work with maybe the most vulnerable of our populations, those that are not been well served by the economy that we currently live in. And I do think there will be a natural equalizing opportunity for people, especially from natural language components of AI, to be able to interact with these very complex systems and not have to know how to do 4, 6, 8-year degrees in coding and these barriers that were placed in front of people who come from a variety of backgrounds and ways of thinking and being. So I'm excited about that, but how do we, systems folks, adapt and make that a reality?
Thank you. I have a two-parter, and the first one will be borderline legalese, but I promise I won't bore you with it. And the second one will be about changing public perception. So my question, and I'm not a lawyer, is what does equal employment opportunity looks like in the age of AI? This is a personal prediction, not a Business Oregon prediction, but within 6 months or sooner, we're going to start seeing AI all over job descriptions. I want to make sure knowledge and fluency in AI-powered tools don't become another barrier to entrance to the workforce and the workplace. So, for example, I'm going to use RCC and SOU as an example. If a particular department or a program is not churning out prompt engineers, does the teaching assistant's job need to have a requirement for them to be fluent in AI, or should you mention that they can learn this on the job? And this is a total hypothetical. I want to make sure that just as with folks who are not able to lift up to 50 pounds every day, they can ask somebody to lift that once a month. So we have been adjusting job descriptions or internship descriptions and apprenticeship descriptions to make these opportunities more accessible for folks. I did not have a smartphone until my agency gave me one in 2014. That's, again, a very rudimentary example, but a lot of us learn from peers in our workplaces where we have our internships. So I really want small businesses and the Lugals alike not to place AI fluency on a pedestal unless it's absolutely required for that role, because we want to be able to play with these tools in workplaces that invest in them. So that was kind of the legalese wishful question. And the second, the second answer is, yesterday, Paul, you talked about how you are asking your employees to play with these tools and implement them. So let's change the public perception to where we support and elevate the stories of employers and schools and places where we gather that give folks an opportunity to level up with their knowledge of these tools, because within several years, yes, while it becomes an equalizer, that's very much important, we're going to see that also become possibly a very major advantage. And not having had access to these tools will be a disadvantage. So let's keep cheering on the entities that allow their employees, interns, their employees' kids, a chance to play with these tools that will help them be advancing in the future.
Thank you. I'd like to pick up, go ahead, Jeff.
Yeah, thank you, Paul. Another place where I have a question, not an answer, but building off what Marta just said. I think perhaps the most important institution we have towards the goal of an economically just society where people have an opportunity to share in the state's prosperity is community colleges, which, by the way, we are drastically underfunding at the state level. And it's inspiring to see what they have done in a few general fields like construction and healthcare and manufacturing, in getting folks prepared, people who are ready to work, in about a year, sometimes 2 years, to enter those sectors with at livable wage positions. It's sort of it's astonishing and wonderful, and one of the pieces of good news that we should be investing more in. My question is, will there be an analog for artificial intelligence? Can we get to a place where, well, the education system generally, I focused on community colleges because they're most obviously doing this, can prepare people in a year for quality AI jobs? That's the question.
Thank you. Jeff, I'd like to pick up on what you mentioned about pricing collusion. How many people here have used or rented out Airbnb places? Okay. For those of you that have Airbnb rentals, you know that there's a pricing tool that you can use to optimize the pricing that you do. And I hadn't thought until you mentioned, Jeff, about how this can be perhaps an inadvertent collusion tool to standardize pricing. And if we have large companies that are largely directing the direction of AI, that is such an insidious, unseen collusion mechanism. Now, it's almost like remarketing online. You know, you go to a store online and look at shoes, and then you get bombarded by shoe ads after that. That's helpful to some degree, but it's also a little bit creepy, right? So how, when we use these tools that really help us, right, especially if we're renting out an Airbnb rental, we want to maximize the price, and we don't really know what we can charge, so this tool is very helpful for us. So how do we balance our desire to get that most efficiency without surrendering some form of freedom in the form of perhaps unintentional price collusion? I'll just throw that out to the panel. Here we want an answer, not a question.
How about some skepticism? So I mentioned the realtors visited me last week, concerned about this program that is putting out an artificially intelligent objective price about what a rental should rent for. And they automatically thought, okay, well, this is a tool for collusion. You spit out a price on a given unit. Mostly this apparently is going to be used for apartments and multi-unit housing. My question is, okay, that's like if you're selling your house, you get a comparative market analysis. And I don't know if it's done by AI or human beings anymore, but here, 4 houses kind of like yours, and this helps you price your house. So this is kind of the same thing. So theoretically, there will be a optimal number produced by AI for a particular rental. But does that necessarily mean collusion? Or does the landlord say, okay, it says $2,000 for this apartment. I want to rent it fast. I'm going to go $1,850. Or I can hang on to it. I want to get a little more. It's a guidepost, but does it have really concerning implications? And I bring it up because I'm trying to ferret through what seems like well-grounded and less well-grounded concerns about AI.
Well, this, to me, is an obvious reflection on the growing divide between the haves and have-nots, right? And if those Airbnb folks and renters are filling their units at that price, the market's not course correcting, which it naturally is supposed to do, and you get increasing numbers of people who are going to experience houselessness and have to move and leave the state and, disrupt their families, disrupt their work. Like it's very complicated, and I don't envy your position at all, Senator, to have to wrestle with these things because, is that something you can regulate? Or does the market decide? And if there's so many people with means and wealth that can support these structures, then at some point, yes, we do, as a society, have to recognize this and step in. But who and how does that get paid for? They're big questions. So I'm sorry I don't have any answers, but it's going to exacerbate a problem that exists already.
When it comes to consumer protection or protection of residents or groups of folks, I see AI tools or AI-empowered tools, even those on the open source end of things, as an empowering tool. So if all of the landlords and property owners can come together, discuss this, have an algorithm spit something back out, I don't know how feasible it is, but it's not impossible. The tenants and those who are working on tenants' rights and advocating for them can also come together and find out how much folks are paying for something that's maybe subpar in Eugene, and how much are folks paying for a comparable subpar unit in Medford. And I'm using that term because housing has been on my mind a lot. Southern Oregon, for the most part, is a rent-burdened set of 2 counties. So every tool that can empower a group to set prices can empower a group to discuss what they're willing to pay, how they organize. There is a community alliance of tenants here in Oregon. And again, this is a Marta thing. This is not a Business Oregon statement. But every tool that can empower one group can empower the one that's advocating for themselves right alongside.
Thank you. Last night, some of us had dinner at Brick Room. And Jeff, you raised the question of, is it fair to have AI screen resumes when hiring people? Is there a programmatic bias, which is something we're concerned about in AI with that? And is that greater or less than the bias that I may have as an individual? So I'd like to ask you folks, how do you feel about AI screeners before employment? Is that sort of memorializing biases, or is it helping us get past them, or both?
Evidently, it's both. There was, I think it was in 2018, Amazon rolled out a program to try to sift through resumes more quickly. And what they did is they took the submitted resumes of people they ended up hiring, and they trained a model on that. And the inbound resumes were compared to similarities of the resumes that had been, for which those people had been hired. And it turns out that the sample itself was biased. It was predominantly male submissions. So when, for example, a female candidate submitted an application with the word woman in it, like Women's Chess Club, Women in Technology, the model actually downgraded them because it was not a semantic match in vector space to the rest of the applicants that had been successful. Huge mistake, right? And they ended up bailing on the project completely. So this is a really good example of how it can be a very helpful tool, but man, you've got to get your priors right first. And really understand how these things work, because if you don't understand how these things work, you can end up building biases into your systems without even realizing it.
So that's what we have to consider now when we submit resumes, that we have semantic matches in vector space.
Maybe this is the right time to really reflect on how much of a mirror AI is to us. And if we don't like what we see, that changing the AI is one step, but changing ourselves is a better step. And it's hard to point the finger at ourselves, especially with large data sets that we're trying to make sense of, to be able to find our own bias. We haven't historically been great at that. And you know, I like what was said earlier. Like, if it doesn't currently know how to give us a full glass of wine, why don't we intentionally teach it what we mean, fill it with data, and let it understand, and maybe ask us questions to clarify. I'm bringing up everybody's quotes, but you know, let it interview us and let it clarify what we're actually asking for, because it might ask clarifying questions that illuminate some things in our own biases.
On the topic of biases, time and time again, human resume selectors have shown a propensity to select names that sound like the names that they grew up around, or names that sound like theirs, or names of the people that they spend most of their time around. Until we eliminate biases like that, and that's very difficult to control for, you would have to set up a question and answer field form that is dry, technical, unless you're hiring for a very dry and technical job, and at some point, if you're eliminating all of the biases and you're controlling for that, you're going to be left with a very binary, a very Boolean variable, yes or no, sort of a set of fields. And I'm not saying that's bad. I'm just saying right now, the decisions on which we would be training those models are going to be very rife with all of the biases that the current generation of workforce and hiring managers and HR managers and founders and fellow workers are bringing with them. And I don't think we're there yet.
You raised a really good point, Adam, about how resumes screened by AI can pick out words that just aren't used a lot in an indifferent way, but thereby harming people that are somehow different. Also, though, if your company is screening resumes based on successful resumes of people that have worked in your company, you're not really leaning towards innovation. So if you're different in any way from the majority of people at that company, AI screening will almost absolutely downgrade you. Now, but as you mentioned, Heather, AI is a mirror of people, and we can change that. But again, the person, like I would tell my class at Pepperdine when we did resume workshops, not only does your resume need to have focus on accomplishments, but it needs to be visually easy to navigate, because employers may spend 10 seconds or less on a resume. Because when I'm looking at resumes, I'm not trying to find the superstar, I'm trying to call out the 90% of resumes I don't want to look at anymore. And I had a friend of mine from a branding agency, and I said, hey, John, is that true that people spend about 10 minutes or 10 seconds on a resume? He says, no, I cut out the first batch in 3 seconds. So even before you might get to that AI culling, there's that human looking at resumes that's as merciless. So it's, luckily now resumes are not used as much. It's LinkedIn, which is sort of an online resume. But not just with jobs, but with so many things in the future, we're going to be subjected to these very narrow biased filters. And yeah.
Can I add a little?
Yeah, please do, because I ran out of steam.
It's interesting, like, if I put a futuristic hat on, that how long will we be using resumes is probably not that long. And what do they tell us? Not that much. They tell you all the things that I think people are going to care much less about, and it's really hard to communicate yourself in a two-dimensional piece of paper with the rudimentary English language to explain something very vast and complex as human consciousness and ability, right? So it also, a similar thing happens in grant writing. So any nonprofits in here, or anyone who's written grants or in education, you can tell when someone's got a very savvy professional grant writer because their grants are great. But is the work really going to be great? And how do you know? How do we know? How do we start filtering for things that actually give us a measure of potential success and impact rather than just who figured out how to play the game and really well?
So back in the 80s, we were told that computers would usher in an age of leisure for all of us. They didn't anticipate that we would be online all the time and accessible to our bosses. Now we have AI, and we see that we can have these unbelievable gains in productivity. Whatever shall we do with all of our leisure time? Will AI give us more leisure time or just more work?
Well, we are having an AI conference on a Saturday, so I think for now the answer is no.
I think we're going to fill, if we gain 30%, we'll fill it. We'll fill it. It's our nature, and we should. So I don't think we're going to have a lot of extra time. I think we might have more enjoyable time with the work that we're doing, but I don't think we'll have leisure time, per se.
I guess I'm wondering here about the quality of the time that we'll have, because it seems not only are we busier and our lives more hectic because of information, in the wake of the information revolution. But a lot of those tasks just aren't very fun. And so if I'm okay for working harder in the wake of AI, if it's quality, satisfying work, if it's, worrying about, which file I missed and looking for it, not so much.
Anyone here a meditator? Wow. Okay, quite a few people. So there's kind of a funny progression of realization when you start meditating. When you begin, you realize that you're very much identified with the thoughts that happen in your head. And over time, you come to abstract your witnessing part a little bit more from the voice in your head and the thoughts that are constantly unfolding, the monkey mind, right? And you kind of, at least for me, realize that a lot of the thoughts that I'm having are just silly. It's easy to get wrapped up in them, but it's just noise. And I think that might be kind of true for an organization's activities. You get so wound up in the work that you're doing that you don't often take a step back, abstract yourself, and say, is this really moving the needle? So I think these productivity tools, these automation tools, can help us be honest with ourselves about what percentage of the effort that we put into something is just busy work, and what percentage is actually moving the needle. Is it 50%? Is it 10%? We haven't actually talked about the AI apocalypse at all so far in the last day or two, which is interesting because that usually is something that comes up. Will machines take over? The word apocalypse in the Greek means unveiling. So it was more of a revelation of some disruptive truth. And perhaps the AI apocalypse is not the Terminator scenario, but it's a revelation about something about us. Is the effort that we spent our lives on really that meaningful in terms of driving human outcomes, in terms of driving happiness? Or could all of that have been automated away, leaving only the rarefied moments of what we'd really like to spend our time on? It's something to ask yourself.
It's a good point that we may or may not have more or less work, but what is the quality of that work we'll have? We talked somewhat yesterday about the disruptions that we're already seeing in the workplace, and there's no doubt about that. But it may not be the case that AI leads to complete unemployment for all of us, because we all have unique points of view. So let's talk a little bit about, once we get past this unveiling disruption that seems to be coming headlong at us, will we have opportunities for employment? And will employment change? For a while now, we've had the gig economy, where many of us don't have that one job. Or we heard earlier today, 13 careers in your life. So you're probably not going to get that Barca lounger and the watch that people used to get for retirement.
Or 13 Barca loungers.
13 Barca loungers, right. Right, in your Airbnb. So what will employment look like? Will it be one job, one company? Or will it be piecemeal gig things that you and your army of automated AI agents perform? Another easy question for you, panelists.
That's a great question.
So what you described does sound like the agentic economy they keep promising us. I don't think we're there yet. There are so many analog issues, and socioeconomic factors that I see here in Southern Oregon that I know is not unique just to us. A lot of it is also evident on the East Coast. For example, Southern Oregon, Jackson, Josephine counties, has a higher per capita number of children and seniors living with disabilities than the statewide average. Right now, AI tools may empower those helping them, but the need for the individuals helping them on the front lines is not going away. And as some social factors are getting more problematic, the need for the individuals on the front line, I'm just going to isolate my comments to that rather than speak generally, that's not going away. The tools are here, but some of you have heard me say this at the RVAI lab that talked about natural resources several weeks back. There are so many analog barriers to AI being the panacea to a lot of these things. We need to keep focusing on the analog things first, and we have plenty of time and opportunities in the meanwhile.
So, I try and always stay positive, but this just brings up a reality that I think we all need to wrestle with and face is, there's been a long commoditization of human labor and human thought and curating what we look at, what we watch, what we see, what we think, what we believe, how we behave, right? How do you manage massive population of people? How do you do that if you're sort of sitting in what you consider a managerial level for those people? So we really need to address the appetite that our society has for additional accumulation of wealth and power and control, because it gives a way outsized influence, and there's a really unfathomable amount of resources stacked into the hands of a very small amount of people. And I don't think, am I shocking anybody with this? I just feel like it's an elephant in the room, and I think we all feel somewhat helpless about when we think about just the scale of it. And I would say do your localized work anyway, and, do what you can do. But I just want to acknowledge that, right? That many years, many generations, I think, we've had this, I have to go to work instead of I get to go to work. So find ways to use get instead of have to. And don't should yourself out of, I should be doing this, I should be doing that. Don't should yourself out of opportunities to do what you really want to do. You'll find a way.
Gentlemen?
One of the practical uses of AI that we've deployed in our company is preserving the knowledge and experience of people as they exit their careers. There's a really big problem with a skilled labor gap. We used to have a mentorship and apprentice program in the United States that was how knowledge and experience was transferred from the older generations to the younger generations, and that kind of went away for a lot of reasons. And much of our world was built and maintained by people who are now retiring. And there wasn't until now any really good way of capturing that experience and bringing it into your organization to keep your organization running efficiently, and also as a training mechanism for incoming employees. And so, one thing that we can do is we can look at our own staff and we can say who has tribal knowledge that is absolutely invaluable. And you can, I'll spare you the details, but there's ways to extract that information from them and build that sounds,
wow.
Oh gosh, okay.
That didn't sound super creepy
it doesn't
at all.
sound, okay. Here's one way that we did it and that other orgs do it, and it doesn't involve brain implants. if you have support lines, for example, tech support lines, where your experienced people are answering calls, most of these calls are recorded for quality assurance. You can take those calls and you can have somebody transcribe them and build a little organization chatbot based on that. And so in the future, when those critical people retire, you have the ability to ask that chatbot how to do X, Y, Z. And it's actually really good at coming up with the answers and synthesizing the knowledge of your skilled people. Documents that are protocol documents in your organization, you can do the same thing with that. And so maybe as a way to provide a positive way of thinking
Sorry.
about these things, there's these practical things that you can do that can actually save your organization and protect the outgoing knowledge and experience and wisdom.
Well, I'll add another question to the pile, taking off of Heather's comments and invitation to do what you want to do with your life, both in conversations with younger people, and I try to have a lot of those, and with my peers who are moving into retirement or in early retirement. I'm struck by how many people say that they don't know what they want to do. Probably natural in a world as dynamic and changing. And my question, my curiosity is around how helpful AI is in, or could be, in answering that question for people.
That gets back to what Thor mentioned about having AI interview yourself.
Yeah.
As like an individual mirror.
I do think in education we'll see a type of mentor, personal assistant bot that, you know, gets widely distributed for young people to not just answer that question, but to help them learn in a style that speaks to their natural way of thinking. And, you know, there's little bits and pieces of that, but I'm excited for that, right? To have a thought partner and someone who you don't have to wait until you go back to your next college class a week from now to ask a teacher a question or, you know, do an email. You can do a lot of that work on your own and learn as you go. And I think that might be the biggest, maybe existential crisis in education and systems and workforce development and economic development and all the things is that, you know, the more that we all do for ourselves, how do we, who tend to be kind of slower moving, how do we adjust appropriately and hang on because there's a lot of value there.
All right, in your respective fields, how do you see the greater adoption and integration of AI changing how your organization measures success?
I wrote this question, so I'll start. Business Oregon does a lot of things. We get rated based on our own performance, KPIs, key performance indicators, and we report on those to the Oregon legislature. We're funded with taxpayer dollars, but also lottery dollars. So one of the metrics on which we are evaluated is customer service. I look forward to my agency and hopefully other state agencies in the future adopting the chatbots for that immediate touch point when somebody has a question that maybe should be directed to a different state agency altogether, because that could improve the customer service and the user experience of folks dialing in. At the same time, continuing with the thought around authenticity that we talked about yesterday, the esteemed panel talked about yesterday. In my line of work, I often get phone calls from organizations in crisis. That is businesses as well as not-for-profits or local organizations where funding is critical and is an issue, and they could have a going concern issue coming up. I know that for those touch points, being able to be that human voice on the phone or being able to write a very human email behind which I can stand and say, no, this was not AI generated, that says at this point in time, maybe there are no grants available, but seek insight from your industry leaders or lawyer up, things like this, even though I can't give legal advice. Some interactions definitely need the human touch point. So I think the customer service metrics in the public sector and also in the private sector may start diverging a little bit. We may have different metrics for successful interactions that are AI facilitated versus the ones that are human facilitated. And another key performance indicator for us is job creation and retention in the state of Oregon. Micah yesterday on the panel said that job loss is inevitable. There are tools and incentives that various economic development organizations nationwide are trying to put in place to not make that a final statement, to where technology-led companies or companies implementing AI while putting in some efficiencies and streamlining processes, maybe they end up expanding other divisions to replace the job loss that may result from some tasks being taken on by AI. So job retention and job creation may look a little bit different, but we've had technological improvement and advances in the past, and Pacific Northwest has weathered it at times very well. So it will be really curious for me. And nationally, we have GDP. Everybody talks about GDP. When we discuss how the economy is performing, there's also a subset of that data called the technology GDP. So we may learn a lot in the next couple of years, and I look forward to the next census as well that talks about where people are. The technology GDP is going to be the one metric I'm curious to keep tracking as AI and other technologies get implemented more.
For our organization, we have been doing our best to provide tools and automation, and I think for me as a leader to look at, so what does success look like is the question. And I think to step back and squash any compulsion I might have to micromanage, and to really set my team up and our community up with tools for success, and maybe make different investments, and then be able to, in a brand new way, AI is allowing us to track KPIs and track impact in more real time, and streamlining that process. Because, you know, for a lot of years, I mean, there have been workforce investments at the federal level since the mid-1800s, and they've gone through various forms and transmutations during that time. And you know, correlation doesn't mean causation. What is real impact of our specific work? Not just that the economy is growing or that more people have jobs, but what is our direct impact for that, and how can we use that for continuous improvement, right? How can we use that to make ourselves better and more impactful, and make sort of the middle part of our budgets and our funding as lean as possible, so that every dollar can get out to communities and to job seekers and to businesses to make our economies prosperous, right? That's the goal for us. So, you know, the better we can do that really comes from just data, being able to look at data. And there are really unprecedented ways for us to visualize and look at data, and we're doing it, and it's, you know, it's great.
I'm really glad you asked this question. You've nudged me into a place I haven't thought about before. Mm-hmm. I'm also grateful I didn't have to answer first. I'm a representative. My job is to represent about 150,000 Southern Oregonians in Salem. And you can have a long conversation about what representation means. You know, are you trying to exactly reflect the will of those 150,000 people? Or are you also commissioned to make your best judgment on difficult issues where you're going to get a lot more input than your constituents have? And that's probably back since Aristotle, that's been a question. But it is really hard on the big issues to know what those 150,000 people mostly think. I think it's probably fair to say that District 3, this district, Southern Jackson County, probably has the most fragmented, diverse opinions of any district in the state. It's not an issue my colleagues who serve geographically small Portland districts have, or large Eastern Oregon districts have. Not everybody agrees, but there's a real thrust on things. That's not true in Southern Oregon. So what data do I have if I want to reflect people's views? It's very imperfect. I get inundated with emails, most of them form, the ones that you're sending when you click on an organization saying, tell Senator Golden he's got to do this or that on this bill. Some of them are individually written. But counting those, pro and con, are not going to tell me very much. And I go to town halls and I get different views, and it's really crude measurements. And I get angry people when I vote a way they don't like, saying I'm violating my responsibility to represent the people because I'm not doing what they want to do. So, a long way of getting to my curiosity about what AI could do to improve the quality of the input for me to be a better representative. It's more than just surveys. Are you yes or no on this proposal? It could have a more qualitative aspect to that. Is, you know, if I've got 60% of the folks feeling, yeah, not very strongly on one side, and 30% on just so passionate on the other side, what do I do with that? So could AI take on the sort of complex task of distilling and handing to its representatives how a district feels about particular issues?
So how do you measure success in light of these tools becoming widespread? I think for me, it has been measured by how we've found a way to use this stuff. The approach that I've taken is by making sure that every member of my team has the mandate to figure out how to make their own lives easier in their job. They all have company paid for AI accounts, and they're instructed to use it and to find a way to simplify things that I couldn't think about, other people couldn't think about in their job. And when they come back with having found something, that is a success. You could codify that into some KPI if you wanted, but because we're still all kind of figuring out what this is, how to use it, how it's going to shape the organization, just finding a leverage point, something that is a real application of this stuff, is itself successful. I think we all care about our colleagues, and we certainly care about our staff, and we want the best for them. We want to we see their skills and capabilities, and we want to see their talents be amplified. And making sure that they understand that these are tools that can help that, and that it's part of the new job description, I think, has gone a long way in my organization to maximizing these tools and figuring out how to use them.
Thanks, Adam. Couple of housekeeping notes. Please do visit our exhibitor tables here on the side of the room. And one last mention about the questions you've been diligently writing down. There is a box to accept them outside. Oh, audience question cards and audience feedback survey. Please put in boxes on the registration table outside. We are about to break for lunch, and we will reconvene at 1:30 with our Living with AI panel. So in this wonderful panel today, on a Saturday, in this apocalyptic AI panel, we've learned that the future may have machines, a man and woman and a dog, that we need to pivot away from backdoor pricing collusion, that failure doesn't exist because disruptions favor the nimble, and that we want to ride the AI dragon. Thank you.